A short story by Ariel Sparks. Copyright Ariel Sparks 2025. Title: Adventure of the StingRay Endeavor. "You're kidding me, right?" Captain Benitez spat, as he stared at the message on his encrypted tablet. The screen flickered slightly with the urgent message. Objective confirmed. Proceed with extreme caution. Expected value: incalculable. Expedition codename: Endeavor. "You think I'd be joking about this shit?" Dr. Elena Krovashevsky, the mission's lead scientist, replied with a smirk. Her Russian accent was thick, her eyes gleaming with the kind of greed that only comes with the promise of a discovery that could redefine human history. "We're talking about a power source that could redefine the paradigm. Its worth is in the billions, Benitez, billions." Benitez grunted, his grip tightening on the tablet. The submarine's walls groaned as the immense weight of the ice sheet above them shifted. They were in the belly of the beast, and it was a beast that didn't take kindly to uninvited guests. "All right, Doc," he said, his voice gruff. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it my way. No cock-ups." The control room of the Endeavor was a hive of activity. Crew members scurried around, their faces a mix of excitement and nerves. The sub was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Sleek and menacing, a silent predator designed to slip through the waters unnoticed. Its shape, reminiscent of a StingRay, it was the crown jewel of modern submarinal engineering. Benitez's eyes darted over the instrument panels, checking and rechecking their depth and location. The sub's powerful engines hummed, a constant reminder of the beast that propelled them deeper into the abyss. The alarm shrieked, a piercing wail that sliced through the subdued murmur of the control room. The ensign at the sonar station jolted upright, her heart racing. She scanned the screens, her eyes widening in horror. "Captain," she called out, her voice trembling. "We've got a fissure. It's opened up about 25 clicks off our starboard bow." Benitez's gaze snapped to the young woman. "Shut that racket," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. The alarm's shrill cry was silenced as the tension in the room thickened. He strode over, his boots clanging against the metal floor. "Show me," he ordered, his voice low and steady. The ensign pointed to the red gash that had appeared on the sonar map, her finger trembling slightly. The captain leaned in, eyes narrowed as he studied the readings. The fissure was growing, a jagged tear in the seafloor that could swallow the Endeavor without so much as a burble. "Distance," he demanded. "The rip is closing in fast, sir. 2 kilometers and counting," the ensign replied. "We have to engage supercavitation to outrun it," Benitez muttered. Elena stepped closer, her voice tight. "We can't risk it. Supercavitation will eat through our power reserves." Benitez met her gaze, his own a storm of defiance. "And if we don't, we'll be stuck down here when the winter hits. We don't have a day to spare, Doc. We do this now or we go home empty-handed." With a sharp nod, the helmsman's hand hovered over the controls. "Ready for supercavitation, Captain?" Benitez bared his teeth in a feral smile. "Engage." The submarine lurched as the engines roared to life, the power surging through the vessel as if it were alive. "Engaging supercavitation," the helmsman called out, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. The control room was a vibrant array of switches, display screens, and levers thrown, presenting the Endeavor's power as it prepared to cheat the very fabric of the ocean. Benitez watched with a mix of anticipation and dread as the sub's nose dipped slightly before shooting upward. The water outside the portholes bubbled and churned, a frothy maelstrom that parted for the sleek StingRay form of their vessel. The screens at the front of the bridge painted a picture of the sea being pushed away, separated. It was mesmerizing, a testament to human ingenuity and audacity. But the beauty of their speed was not lost on the captain. He knew the risks, the fine line between progress and disaster. "Keep us stable," he growled. "We don't want to turn this submarine into a careening missile." The helmsman nodded, his eyes glued to the screens. The water parted before them as the Red Sea did for Moses, the sub's slippery shape cutting through the sea as if it were a hot knife through butter. The sonar beeped a constant rhythm, the heartbeat of their mission echoing through the metal walls. The fissure grew larger, a gaping maw in the Earth's crust. "Our current velocity, 150 knots, the helmsman called out, his voice tight with excitement and fear. The sub quivered with power, the air thick with the scent of burning circuits and the electricity of anticipation. 175. 180. 185. The fissure was now a yawning abyss, its jagged teeth reaching for the Endeavor. Benitez clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "Get us clear now, goddammit," he shouted. With a hiss, the engines powered down from supercavitation. The submarine lurched as it dropped back into the ocean's embrace, the water slapping against the hull. The screens flickered, and for a moment, there was silence, an uneasy calm. "Clear!" the helmsman yelled. The tension in the room uncoiled slightly as the crew exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Benitez turned to Elena, his eyes cold. "Now what the hell is that?" He jabbed a finger at the churning blackness on the long-range sensors. Her smile was brittle, a mask of triumph and terror. "That, Captain Benitez, is our final obstacle before the prize. An underwater maelstrom, a wall of ocean currents 80 kilometers thick. Our relic lies just beyond it." The control room buzzed with mutters and curses, the crew exchanging glances that spoke of doubt and determination. Benitez stepped back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "And how do you propose we get through that?" "We've got a toy the others don't," Elena said as she leaned against the console, her eyes fixed on the screens. "A little something I picked up from a colleague at the JSC Sevmash Research Bureau. It's called the Gyroscopic Stabilization Module. It is experimental, but it'll keep us steady." Benitez raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "What's the catch, Doc?" "No catch," she replied. "Just a bit of unconventional tech that'll make sure we don't go for a wild ride we didn't sign up for." The captain grunted, his skepticism clear, but he didn't argue. He'd seen weirder shit on other clandestine missions. The crew, however, exchanged glances filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were about to dive into the unknown, with nothing but their wits and a bit of stolen Russian tech to keep them alive. "All right, let's get this show on the road," Benitez barked. "Ensign, prep the GSM for deployment, and keep those sensors sharp. I want to know the second anything looks fishy down here." The ensign nodded, her hands working the keyboard. The subsystems whirred and clicked as the gyroscopic stabilization module slid into place, its lights flickering to life with a soft hum. The captain felt a strange mix of excitement and dread, a heavy cocktail of emotions now swirling in his head. The Endeavor descended into the deep, the pressure outside the hull increasing with each meter they dove. The crew's voices grew tense as they made the final adjustments to the subsystems. Elena's words hung in the air, promising a path through the treacherous underwater maelstrom that lay ahead. "We're going to be like a leaf on a river," she explained. "The GSM will read the currents, anticipate their shifts, and guide us through. And if it doesn't," Benitez grumbled, "then we're ass up in a dick storm without lube," she replied bluntly. "But let's not think about that." The captain barked out a laugh, which did little to conceal his nerves. 4 degrees up, Bubble. "Ready to ride this current, crew?" The response was a mix of acknowledgments, some nervous, some excited. Benitez felt a strange kinship with these misfits, brought together by the promise of wealth and discovery. The sub's nose began to ascend, the engines purring as they aligned with the powerful current that would carry them into the heart of the abyss. "Ready for supercavitation?" the helmsman announced, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Benitez nodded, his heart racing. "Let's get a move on," he ordered. The water outside was a shifting tapestry of blues and blacks, the light from the surface a distant memory. He took a deep breath, his knuckles white on the arms of his chair. With a roar that seemed to shake the very welds of the sub, they were off. The water parted before them like a curtain drawn back, revealing the swirling chaos of the maelstrom. The GSM whirred and clicked, the screens a blur of data as it worked to keep the Endeavor on a stable course. "Hold tight, this is going to get bumpy," Benitez warned, his voice echoing through the control room. The crew braced themselves. The sub's nose dipped and rose as it rode the currents, the walls of water around them seeming to close in, only to be pushed back by the sheer power of the sub's thrusters. The lights flickered, and the air was electric with adrenaline. Elena's eyes were glued to the sonar, her breath coming in short gasps as she whispered to herself, the words in Russian lost on the English-speaking crew. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the railing, her nails biting into her palms. The standing current grew closer, a wall of water that no other submarine had ever dared to challenge. "Brace for impact," Benitez shouted. The sub's engines roared in protest, the vibrations resonating through the hull. The standing current grew until it filled the portholes, a towering barrier of liquid fury. And then they hit it. The impact was like being slammed by a titan's fist. The sub lurched violently, sending crew members sprawling. The lights flickered, the instruments screamed, and for a moment, everything went black. When they came back on, the screens were a jumble of static, the readings haywire. But they were through. The helmsman fought for control, his hands a blur over the sticky, sweat-soaked controls. "We're through," he choked out, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the sub's tortured systems. The maelstrom fell away behind them, revealing a cavernous chamber that stretched into darkness. The walls of the chamber were lined with ancient, gleaming metal, veins of an unknown substance pulsing with a soft, ethereal light. "The relic," Benitez murmured, his eyes wide with awe. "It's real." The sub glided through the water, the current carrying them gently now. They had survived the impossible. The prize was within reach. The crew looked at one another, their expressions a mix of shock and jubilation. But the moment was short-lived. With a jolt that sent everyone in the control room tumbling to the floor, the submarine was enveloped in a writhing embrace of gelatinous tentacles. The screens flickered wildly as the sentinels, massive jellyfish-like creatures, stuck to the outer hull. Their electrified tendrils coiled around the Endeavour, disrupting its delicate systems. "What in the gelatinous mass is that?" Benitez roared as he scrambled back into his chair, his eyes wide with shock. Elena's voice was strained as she shouted over the din. "Sentinels, we have to disengage the GSM before it's too late." The helmsman looked at her, panic etched into his features. "But the current? Now goddammit," she yelled, her hands smacking down on the emergency release. The whine of the stabilization module powering down was almost lost in the cacophony of alarms that filled the room. The screens cleared, the chaotic mess of data on them becoming a coherent picture of their predicament. The sentinels, each the size of a bus, were pummeling the sub with their tentacles, their pulsating bodies casting an eerie glow through the portholes. Benitez's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. "These are the legendary sentinels, huh?" he spat. "Great frigging legends." The sub lurched again as a tentacle smacked into the hull, sending a shiver of fear through everyone on board. The ensign at the sonar station was frantically tapping on her console, trying to get a read on the creatures. "They're not natural," she quivered. "Their bioluminescence is... it's like nothing I've ever seen." Elena's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and horror. "They're guardians," she murmured. "Left here to protect the relic from any who dare to take it." "Great," Benitez spat. "And you just had to bring us to this party." He turned to the helmsman. "Give me a status report. What can we do about these things?" The helmsman's eyes darted over the screens, the sweat running down his face mixing with the condensation on the instruments. "Their electrical discharges are frying our circuits, Captain. We're losing power to the engines." "Not good," Benitez said, his voice tight. "What about the weapons?" "Non-lethal only, sir," a crew member called out from the back. "We weren't expecting to run into anything so alien down here." "Perfect," Benitez muttered. "Just what we need. A billion-dollar sub with the survival instincts of a fat goldfish." He looked at Elena, whose face had gone as pale as the tentacles that now coiled around the Endeavour. "So these party crashers are what? Some kind of ancient lore? The relic's tripwire?" Elena nodded with a tremble in her voice. "It seems so. They're not just sentinels. They're guardians of the relic. We need to get them off before we lose all power." The crew scurried about, trying to follow the captain's orders while keeping their balance as the sub was buffeted by the gelatinous behemoths outside. Benitez stalked over to Elena, his expression one of frustration. "You had any bright ideas on how to get these suckers off us?" Her eyes flicked to the screens, where the pulsing veins of light on the sentinels' bodies danced in an eerie ballet of death. "We can try changing our signal frequency," she suggested, her voice a mix of hope and doubt. "It might confuse them," Benitez snorted. "Confuse them? They're jellyfish, not shoplifters at a bazaar." But desperation breeds innovation, and Elena had one more trick up her sleeve. "This sub has the charge skin generators. The hull is coated with the stuff," she said gleefully. "They're designed to detect the faintest electrical and magnetic fields, but in theory, they could also pull power from these very fields." The captain raised an eyebrow. "Theory? Well, it's never been tested under combat conditions," she admitted, "but it could work." The helmsman's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, we're losing power to life support. If we don't do something now—" Benitez's face grew grim. "Do it!" he barked. "Let's see if we can't make these tentacles into a giant battery pack." Elena's words hung in the air, the potential solution a flicker of hope in the face of the alien horror that gripped the Endeavor. "We're going to need to work fast," she barked. "Activate the charged skin generators. Maybe we can use them to pull power from those tentacles and give them a taste of their own medicine." The crew raced to their stations, hands flying over controls with a precision born of fear and adrenaline. The sub's hull vibrated as the generators whined to life, the tentacles outside writhing in a silent scream. The screens flickered, and then, as if a switch had been thrown, the power readings began to climb. The lights in the control room grew brighter, the instruments clearer. The sentinels, as if sensing a shifting power dynamic, began to loosen their grip. The submarine inched forward, the tentacles sliding away like a lover's embrace turned to revulsion. The crew watched with bated breath as the last of the gelatinous tendrils slithered away. "It's working," Benitez murmured, his eyes glued to the screens. "Keep it steady. Keep it steady." The sub continued to crawl through the cavern, the sentinels giving them a wide berth. The chamber opened up before them, revealing a scene so unexpected it could have been plucked from an epic fantasy. An underwater garden stretched out, illuminated by a soft, pulsing glow that seemed to come from within the very walls. Bioluminescent plants waved gently in the current, casting an otherworldly light over the scene. The water was clear as glass, the colors so vivid they appeared alive. At the center of this ethereal tableau was their prize, the relic. It was smaller than any of them had imagined, no larger than a sedan. Its shape was elegant, having the appearance of a crescent moon that gleamed and seemed to hum with ancient power. The air was charged with excitement, the tension in the control room palpable. Benitez leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving the relic. "Take us closer," he ordered, his voice tight with anticipation. The Endeavor glided forward, the hydro screws cutting through the water with a whisper. As they approached, the relic's surface shimmered, the light playing across its curves in a mesmerizing dance. "Take it in, folks," Benitez said, his voice cutting through the awe. "But remember, this isn't a damn sightseeing tour. We've got work to do." The submarine's legs extended, touching the sea floor with a gentle thud. The bay doors opened, revealing a chamber filled with water, a pool of the ocean itself within the belly of their metal beast. The divers, suited up and ready, stared at the relic, their eyes wide with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "All right," Benitez barked. "You know the drill. Secure that shit and let's get out of here before those tentacle twats decide we're back for round 2. The divers nodded, their faces obscured by the reflective visors of their helmets. They dropped into the water, silent as shadows, their movements precise and rehearsed. They had trained for this, the lure of the relic and the millions it would bring too tempting to resist. Elena hovered over the crane controls, her eyes darting between the monitors and the relic. "You think it's safe to just grab it?" she asked, her voice laced with doubt. Benitez grunted. "As safe as a crackhead with a landmine. But what choice do we have?" The divers approached the relic, their lights playing over its gleaming surface. The water around them grew murky with sediment, their heartbeats echoing in their ears. One of them reached out, his hand trembling as he made contact with the cold metal. The relic hummed to life, the veins of light pulsing in time with the divers' own hearts. For a moment, the cargo bay was silent, save for the steady beep of the monitors. And then, the chaos erupted. The sentinels, riled by the intrusion, surged back, their tentacles lashing out like whips. The divers rolled and dodged, their movements a dance of survival. The crane groaned, lifting the relic with a jerk. It hovered just above the water, the tentacles writhing below like a sea of snakes. Now, 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 Benitez roared. The crane's mechanical arms stretched down into the water, Elena's grip firm on the controls, the divers swimming around it in a close formation. You've all never seen wonders of the deep before. Get that relic up out of there. You got work up here. The divers nodded, their movements efficient and swift as they attached the hooks to this gleaming metal crescent. The water churned with their effort, the sentinel's tentacles slashing through it like lightning. The relic began to rise, the tentacles wrapping around the crane's arms in a desperate attempt to reclaim it. Hold it steady, Elena grunted. Her hand hovered over the frequency control, ready to adjust the sub's signal at a moment's notice. The crane whined, straining under the weight of the relic. The sentinels grew more agitated, their tentacles coiling tighter around the metal. One diver had a tentacle wrapped around his leg, his screams echoing through the water and into the cargo bay. Cut the power, Benitez shouted. The crane's arms jerked, sending a pulse through the water. The tentacle released the diver, retreating with a high-pitched whine that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. The sub lurched as it drew power from the sentinels, the engines roaring to life. The screens flickered again, the power status reading jumping up to 90%. Well, I'll be damned, Benitez said with a sly smile. Those jellyfish are more useful than I gave them credit for. The divers hauled themselves back into the sub, their eyes wild with the rush of adrenaline. The bay doors groaned shut, the water outside retreating with a final hiss. The relic sat in its chamber, pulsing with a strange, seductive glow. Benitez turned to Elena, his eyes gleaming. Let's see if we can't teach these bastards to know their place. Her smile was a promise of chaos. Engage supercavitation, plow right through them, she said. It's the only way. Benitez nodded. Prepare for supercavitation, he bellowed. We're not playing nice anymore. The control room was a blur of activity as the engines roared to life, the sub's hull vibrating with the power that was about to be unleashed. The screens flickered, the sentinels' forms growing larger, more menacing. The helmsman's voice was a steady murmur of concentration. Ready, Captain? Engage supercavitation, Benitez ordered, his eyes never leaving the screens. The sub's hull groaned as the air coating formed around it, a momentary cocoon of bubbles that danced and shimmered in the bioluminescent light. The sentinels surrounding them paused, their tentacles writhing in confusion. The thrust drive surged, the sub leaping forward with a roar. The water churned, the standing bubble at the bow swelling and then collapsing with a sound like a thunderclap. The sentinels were caught in the maelstrom, their tentacles flailing as they were sucked into the vortex. The maelstrom grew, the walls of the chamber cracking and collapsing. The Endeavor's speed was a blur, the world outside reduced to a smear of colors and shadows. The sentinels that had clung to them were torn away, their lifeless forms left behind in the wake of the sub's escape. The chamber collapsed around them, the force of the implosion sending shockwaves through the water. The screens flickered, the world outside going dark for a moment before the sub shot free into the open ocean, the walls of the cavern crumbling into debris and rock behind them. Above, in the frigid Antarctic Sea, a surface ship bobbed, its crew staring at the monitors in amazement. They had felt the tremor, the water around them churning with the aftermath of the sub's battle. They had been searching for the Endeavor, following the breadcrumbs of its encrypted transmissions, eager to claim the relic for themselves. On the sub's screens, the pursuer grew larger, a dark shape on the water. The captain's smile was cold, his eyes narrowed. Looks like we've got company, he growled. Ensign, plot a new course. Take us to the surface, full speed ahead. The ensign nodded, her hands a blur on the console. The sub shot upward like a bullet, the pressure outside the hull decreasing with each meter they gained. The crew held their breath, the suspense thick enough to cut with a knife. As they broke through the surface, the cold air hit the sub like a slap. Benitez's eyes narrowed. We've got a tail, folks, he announced, his voice calm and steady. Well, someone wants to crash our party. Power status? He barked. 30%, Captain. the ensign replied, her voice tight. But we've suffered structural damage. Can't dive below 30 meters. Benitez swore under his breath. So, we can't outrun them, and we can't hide, he said, his gaze sweeping the room. Looks like we're going to have to play host whether we like it or not. Elena stepped forward, her expression grim. They're privateers, she spat, hired by the same conglomerate that tried to buy us out. They had no idea we made it this far. They're searching for us, Benitez murmured, stroking his chin. They've got no clue of our speed. What are their weapons? He barked. Depth charges, sir, but they're not optimized for shallow runs, the ensign replied. And an electronic warfare suite. Impressive, but we've got the drop on them. Benitez shrugged. They're searching where we were. They don't know how quickly we cover these distances. He glanced over at Elena. Looks like we get to keep our edge a little longer. The privateer ship grew larger, its lights piercing the night. The ensign's voice grew more urgent. They're locking onto us, Captain. We need to move. Benitez nodded, his hand hovering over the intercom. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, he said calmly. We're going to play a little game of hide and seek. The sub swerved and moved in a manner that aligned it with the waves. The privateer's searchlights swept the area. The Endeavor's hull was coated in a stealth material that made it almost invisible to sonar, but the ship's proximity was too close for comfort. They're launching, the ensign said, her voice a mix of dread and awe. Depth charges, Benitez muttered. They're trying to force us to surface. They have no idea we're already on the water. Bunch of cock-up and amateurs. He turned to his crew. We may be wounded, but we aren't dead. Take us down to 20 meters, he ordered, a hint of glee in his voice. Let's play a little game of find the cheese, shall we? The submarine descended, the depth gauge ticking downward with a satisfying rhythm. The privateer's depth charges exploded in the distance. The sound muffled, but the light show through the portholes was unmistakable. The crew held their breath, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. They're getting closer, Elena warned, her eyes glued to the sonar. Benitez's smile grew. Perfect. It's showtime. He turned to the divers who were already suiting up. Prepare for an old-fashioned breach. We're going to take that ship and we're going to do it the hard way. The divers nodded, their eyes gleaming with excitement and a touch of madness. They had been trained for this, for the thrill of combat beneath and above the waves. The Endeavor leveled out at the designated depth, the privateer ship looming above them. The water was murky, a perfect cover for their stealthy approach. The captain's eyes swept over the control room, his gaze lingering on each crew member. Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves, he said, his voice a low growl. We're fighting for our family, our future. Whatever it takes, we keep that relic out of their greedy hands. The 4 divers, each an elite warrior in their own right, checked their equipment one last time, their expressions a mix of excitement and grim determination. They were the sub's secret weapon, a silent force trained for the most dangerous of engagements. The hatch above them cracked open, the icy water of the Antarctic Sea spilling in. With practiced ease, they swam out into the darkness with their bodies disappearing into the ink-black sea. The privateer's lights played over the waves, but the divers remained invisible, their stealth suits blending with the water around them. As they approached the ship, they saw their opportunity. The privateer's crew was in disarray, searching the waves for any sign of their prey, unaware of the danger lurking just beneath the surface. With a gesture from the lead diver, the team activated their magnetic winches, the cables shooting upward and latching onto the ship's hull with a muted clank. They ascended the side of the ship, their movements swift and silent. The water was their domain, and they owned it. The first privateer to spot them was too late, a gloved hand clamping over his mouth before he could even gasp. The diver's blade sliced through the cold night air and into the man's throat, his life extinguishing with a muffled gurgle. The other 3 moved like ghosts, their forms barely visible in the dark, their eyes gleaming with the excitement of the hunt. The first diver, codenamed Shadow, had the uncanny ability to blend into his environment. He was the first through the hatch, his movements liquid as he made for the engine room. The second, Storm. Her agility and speed were unrivaled. They split up, the plan clear. Take the ship's power source and control before the enemy could react. The third, Razor, had a knack for precision. His hands a deadly blade he carried. The fourth, Echo, remained on the deck, a silent sentinel ready to repel any who dared interrupt their mission. The stairwell to engineering was a tight fit, but they were used to tighter spaces. Shadow took the lead, his eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. The lights in the engine bay flickered, the red emergency lights throwing the space into stark relief. It resembled a scene from hell. The metal surfaces painted crimson and the shadows deep and menacing. They could hear the panic above them, the thunderous footsteps of the crew running to their stations. But down here, they were alone. The silence was shattered by the shrill wail of an alarm. The game was up. They had been spotted. On the deck, Echo watched the chaos unfold. Security teams were racing towards them, their eyes wide with fear. He smirked beneath his mask, the cold Antarctic air a perfect match for his icy demeanor. He didn't need a gun to be lethal. His fists were his weapon, and he was about to show these amateurs real terror. The fight on deck was brutal and fast. The privateers had numbers, but they were no match for the divers' training and ferocity. Echo took them down with a series of swift, precise strikes, his fists and elbows leaving a trail of broken bones and crumpled bodies. A silent dance of death that played out under the cold Antarctic stars. Meanwhile, in the engine room, the two other divers, Shadow and Storm, faced a different kind of opponent. The engineers were not just techs. They were survivors of a world where the only law was survival of the fittest. They wielded their wrenches and knives with the skill of gladiators, their eyes reflecting the cold, hard reality of their lives. The air was filled with the clang of metal on metal, the scent of fear and sweat mixing with the faint odor of diesel. Shadow, a master of close combat, danced among them, his movements liquid and deadly. His knees and elbows found their marks, crunching bones and rupturing organs. His strikes were precise, efficient, and brutal. He didn't bother with the dramatics of speech. His actions did the talking. The engineers fell before him, their faces a mix of surprise and pain. Storm, on the other hand, was a chameleon. 3 engineers, poised for an attack, stood before her. "What, do I look like the girl you couldn't get over standing there? I don't know if you want to dance or die." Her tone defiant, her mouth full of insults throwing jibes and jokes that threw her opponents off balance. Her knife work was as sharp as her wit, and she used it with deadly ease, leaving a trail of blood in her wake. The engineers weren't ready for the ferocity of her humor, let alone her blade. The fight was a choreography of violence, with Storm and Shadow taking the lead, each move a deadly step that echoed through the cramped space. The engineers' numbers were no match for the divers' skill and experience. Within minutes, the space was littered with bodies. The only sounds, the grunts of effort and the wet thuds of flesh meeting steel. As the last engineer crumpled to the floor, Shadow turned to Storm, who was already at the control panel. "Showtime," Shadow murmured, his voice a serene contrast to the carnage around them. Storm nodded. She slammed her hand down on the power switch, and the engine room plunged into darkness. On deck, the chaos grew. The privateer's crew was now fully alert, searching for the invaders. Echo and Razor had turned the tables, using the shadows to their advantage. The former security team members had become their prey, their cries for help silenced by the cold, unfeeling steel of the guns the divers captured. The night sky above was a mirror to the carnage below, the stars twinkling indifferently to the dance of death and betrayal. Echo's eyes were like twin lasers, cutting through the darkness as he searched for the wheel room. His heart was a steady drum, his breathing measured. He had no need for words. His gun was his voice, and it spoke loud and clear. Razor, meanwhile, had found the crew's arsenal. He moved with a silent grace, his knives glinting in the dim emergency lights. The security team was no match for his precision and speed. One by one, they were neutralized, their cries silenced by the cold steel of his blades. The smell of blood mingled with the antiseptic tang of the ship's corridors, painting a grim picture of the battle unfolding. The bridge was a fortress of chaos. Bullets sprayed the air, sparking against the metal surfaces as Echo rolled and dove, his aim surgical, and the bullets finding their marks with a brutal grace. The privateer captain had fled, but not before giving the order to launch the ship's prize, a Harrier jump jet. The deck beneath them trembled as the aircraft roared to life. The captain, its sole occupant, its engine screaming a challenge to the night as it shot out of the makeshift hatch and disappeared into the inky sky. "We have the ship," echoes called out over the radio, "but the captain's flown the coop." "Understood." Benitez's reply was calm, almost amused. "Keep your eyes peeled. Don't know what traps they have waiting for us." The Endeavor's crew had taken control, but the victory was bittersweet. The captain of the privateer ship had escaped, but not without leaving behind a treasure trove of supplies and intel that would be vital for their own survival and the success of their mission. In the control room, Benitez's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the damage reports coming in. "We've got a lot of work to do, and we're not out of the woods yet." The relic pulsed in its chamber, a silent witness to the carnage above. The crew knew that their prize was not only precious, but also powerful, and now, vulnerable. They had to move fast to repair their own vessel and make their escape before the inevitable reinforcements arrived. Their mission was clear: get the relic to Argentina and unlock its secrets. But first, they had to survive the night. The privateer ship was now their temporary shelter, a floating tomb filled with the echoes of the battle. They moved quickly, stripping it of anything they could use to patch the Endeavor's wounds. They worked through the night, the adrenaline of the fight slowly wearing off, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their situation. They were deep in enemy waters, surrounded by potential threats, and with a relic that could change the course of human history. And yet, as they worked, there was a sense of camaraderie, of shared purpose. They were pirates of the deep, bound by the promise of wealth and discovery, driven by the thrill of the unknown. They knew that every moment counted. Every screw and wire they salvaged brought them closer to their goal. Dawn broke, a pale, unforgiving light that bled into the control room, revealing the harsh reality of their situation. The helmsman looked up from his console, his face etched with fatigue. "Power stores up to 70%, Captain," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "We've got enough juice to keep us going for a while." Benitez nodded, his eyes never leaving the sonar display. The privateer ship's hull groaned and creaked in the distance, a constant reminder of their precarious position. "Good work, let's keep at it," he said, his tone a mix of relief and determination. "We need to be at full strength before we make our move." The ensign looked up from her repair work, her eyes weary. "The hull's almost patched up, Captain. Another few hours and we'll be good to go." "Excellent," he growled. "Take what we need from that ship and be ready to cast off in the coming hours." The crew moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, stripping the privateer ship of its valuable assets. The dawn's light grew stronger, piercing the control room's portholes and casting stark shadows across their determined faces. The helmsman's voice crackled over the intercom. "Power stores at 90%, Captain. The generators are working overtime." "Good, let's not waste any more time here." His gaze swept over the crew, his expression a blend of satisfaction and caution. They had come so far, endured so much, and the prize was within their grasp. But he knew the journey was far from over. The waters of Antarctica held more secrets than just the relic they sought. The divers re-entered the Endeavor, their gear clanking against the metal floors as they moved swiftly to their stations. The ship groaned and shifted as the last of the privateer's supplies were transferred, the submarine's belly now bulging with stolen goods. The engines hummed to life, the vibrations resonating through their bones as the sub began to inch away from its temporary dock. The waters were eerily calm, the silence broken only by the occasional crack of ice and the distant cries of seabirds. They had to be vigilant. The enemy was surely on their heels. They had survived the deep, but now they had to navigate the treacherous waters of diplomacy and greed. Elena checked the relic's chamber one last time, her eyes lingering on the pulsing artifact. "It's alive," she murmured. "I can feel it." The captain looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "We're not out of the freezer yet," he snapped. "The real battle starts now." The Endeavor glided through the waters like a predator. The crew knew that their escape was far from over. The enemy would not let them simply sail away with their prize. They had to be ready for anything. In the control room, Benitez's eyes never left the sonar, his jaw tight as he chewed on the stub of a cigar. Keep your eyes peeled. The water's as treacherous as a whore with a knife in her garter. The crew nodded, their gazes darting around the screens, their bodies taut with anticipation. The Endeavor's engines hummed, a living beast, the power surging through the submarine's veins as it sliced through the waves. Surface contact? The ensign's voice crackled over the intercom. Looks like a pod of orcas. Elena rolled her eyes. Great, we're being escorted by the local wildlife. Benitez chuckled, the tension in his shoulders easing for a moment. Better than tortoises with magnetic minds, I guess. The banter was a thin veneer over the reality of their situation, and now he felt an uneasy rumble in his stomach. His mind briefly drifted to a savory memory. Turtle soup. As the chaos over the past day left him little time for a meal, now hunger was front of mind, and the sub's cook, a savant of spice, an artist with okra and Scotch bonnet, left his mouth watering. His food, a reprieve the captain hoped was near. However, he knew they were carrying a prize that could change the world. The ocean was vast, but their foes had resources beyond their wildest dreams. They had to be vigilant, ready for anything. As the submarine pushed towards the open sea, the sonar beeped insistently. A shadowy form had appeared on the screen, closing fast. The crew tensed, their jokes dying on their lips. The captain's hand hovered over the intercom. All hands, this is not a drill. Prepare for combat maneuvers. The room exploded into action, the crew springing to their stations with the ease of seasoned soldiers. The Endeavor dove, the hull groaning as it descended into the murky depths. The enemy was above them now, their sonar pings growing louder, more insistent. The water outside grew darker, the pressure increasing with every meter. The submarine's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across their tense faces. Suddenly, the ensign shouted, "Torpedoes incoming!" Benitez's smile was cold, the light glinting off his teeth. This is where things get interesting. His hand slammed down on the evasive maneuvers button, and the Endeavor twisted and turned in the water like a serpent evading a hunter's spear. The torpedoes followed, their deadly path a silent scream in the water. "Supercavitation online!" the ensign shouted. "Take us home," Benitez barked back. The submarine's hull shimmered as the protective bubble formed around it, the water around them seemingly boiling as the speed increased exponentially. The world outside became a blur of blue and white, the pressure increasing to a point where their very bones felt like they might snap. The crew was thrown into their seats, the G-forces pushing them back as if an invisible hand were trying to crush them into the metal beneath. The sub's engines roared like a beast unchained, the vibrations shaking lose any lingering doubt or fear. "We are passing 300 knots, Captain," the ensign's voice straining through the acceleration. They were moving at speeds that defied conventional physics, a silent ghost in the deep. The torpedoes grew smaller, the enemy ship a mere speck in their wake. "We're in the clear." Elena's voice was a gasp of relief. "They can't keep up." The captain nodded, his eyes still on the sonar. "Not yet," he said, his tone grim. "But we have a lead." The minutes dragged by like hours, the tension in the control room a palpable entity that coiled around them. The only sounds were the deep thrum of the engines and the occasional crackle of the radio. The crew held their collective breath, waiting for the inevitable. The sonar beeped again, the blips closer, more insistent. The enemy was still on their tail, but the Endeavor's speed was unmatched. For now, but Benitez knew it was only a matter of time before their pursuers would have their own tricks. The hour passed in a blur, the only constant the pulse of the engines and the tension that filled the sub. The divers, having completed their duties, retreated to their quarters, their adrenaline waning. The relic's chamber was a beacon of light in the sub's darkened interior, the object within pulsing with a mesmerizing rhythm. Finally, the sonar fell silent. Benitez barked an order, and the submarine began to ascend. The pressure outside eased, and the crew could feel the change in the water's density. The engines roared louder as the Endeavor dropped out from the supercavitation's embrace, the world around them slowing to a crawl once more. They surfaced with a hiss of escaping air, the cold Argentinian coastal spray misting over the deck. The mountains of Ushuaia, Argentina loomed in the distance, a stark reminder of their victory. They had done it. They had outsmarted, outfought, and outrun their pursuers. The relic was theirs. The captain's voice boomed over the intercom. "We're home, folks. Welcome to the edge of the world." The tension in the air dissipated, and the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They had made it. For now, they were safe. The ride into the harbor was a silent one. Each member of the crew was lost in their own thoughts, the reality of their adventures sinking in. The stark beauty of the icebergs and the cobalt sea gave way to the jagged cliffs of Tierra del Fuego. The lights of civilization grew closer, and with them, the promise of wealth, fame, and perhaps, most importantly, a hot meal and a stiff drink.
I do hope you have enjoyed what you have heard so far. Next week I will be moving on to my first novel, Chronicle of the Seer's Orb, a sci-fantasy story. I thank you for your support and do hope to see this support increasing for the future.